So that's more of the qualitative piece, is really investing in your employees to build that culture. And you can see that through the cross-training initiatives, having a matrix. You have one person that maybe is cross-trained in 3 out of 5 areas. That's fantastic. They're asking you when they're going to be trained in all 5, right? So I think those are the 2 big areas that folks can focus on.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this episode of Power Supply, we will speak with Melissa Henderson, manager at TriVista, and I'm going to go ahead and throw a little background story out for everybody. You sort of know him, but you don't know you know him, but our producer, Aaron Leslie, does all of the background production work, and he happens to have a cousin who works in manufacturing. He got us connected with our guest today, and we're going to be talking about operational excellence. And it's about culture building, just like it is about culture building within your supply chain teams and your entire healthcare organization, making sure that they're tied to the mission and why the work that is being done is important. And manufacturers can do this within the confines of their 4 walls of manufacturing as well, Gary. And Melissa's going to tell us how and why to do that.
Yeah, hats off to you, Aaron, giving us this opportunity. I mean, you think about manufacturing, all of a sudden you're like, it's a cold, rainy, good morning. It's not that way. And I'm excited to see how she translates this into the patient experience. Sometimes, you're coming in for your 8, 12-hour days in a manufacturing world. What's that look like to get down the path of where we're going to utilize that component with a patient ultimately? So looking forward to Melissa's dialogue with some great experience. And thank you, Aaron, for connecting the dots and getting her on our podcast.
All right. Well, let's pull the curtain back and take a peek with Melissa for all of our healthcare supply chain leaders and audience that's listening in. Stay with us. We're going to be right back with Melissa.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Power Supply.
All right, let's kick this one off here on Power Supply with Melissa Henderson, manager at TriVista. We're going to be talking about operational excellence and take a look behind the curtain on how manufacturers can create a workplace culture that is connected to the mission of patient care. Guys, we've had some episodes in the past where we've talked to supply chain leaders, Lisa Farmer coming to mind as one, talking about building a culture and connecting the supply chain team members, to the patient and the patient care and having their own patient experience. But we never talked about the challenge of getting manufacturers and the staff that are in their workplace cultures connected to it as well. And so Melissa's here to kind of illuminate on all of that and maybe share some best practices and her experiences. So Melissa, thanks so much for coming on the Power Supply podcast.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here today.
So, Melissa, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody, talk about what the work is that you're doing today and maybe some of your background leading up to our conversation.
Absolutely. So today I work for TriVista. TriVista is a leading advisory firm in operations, supply chain, technology, and executive recruiting. So we provide transaction advisory services to private equity firms and performance improvement support to operating companies. I've been working with this firm for about a year and a half, but previously I come from the medical device industry, about 12 plus years, starting in engineering, moving throughout process engineering and manufacturing, then into distribution, customer service, field service, and fulfillment. So really have had a broad supply chain and engineering background that also supports working with the advisory firm today.
Great. One of the things that we talk about probably more than we'd like on this show is some of the staffing challenges that are happening in healthcare. And I'm just wondering, is that something that's the same for medical device manufacturers? Are they facing the same challenges that healthcare is in terms of getting good workers and maintaining optimal kind of levels of staffing?
Yeah, absolutely. Staffing challenges affect the medical device manufacturing industry, although it can look a bit different than clinical settings. So over the past few years, we've seen very tight labor markets in certain regions or for specific skill sets. For example, technical roles like machinists have become increasingly hard to fill. And in markets that I've worked previously, like Memphis, which can be a hub for industry and for medical device manufacturing, you're not just competing with other manufacturers, you're up against major players like the Amazons. They can lure talent away with seasonal pay premiums. So retention and that differentiation really becomes critical for a site in those locations.
You mentioned Memphis as one of them. What are some other areas of the country? I'm just kind of thinking that technical piece is not a surprise to me. I feel like there's been less of a focus on the trades over the last 20 or 30 years and really cultivating that, which is why I think also, when you do find somebody who has a skilled trade experience, they're expensive now. Just think about people that have maybe tried to build a deck on their house or do any home improvements, like the environment and the costs associated with that. It's kind of difficult to manage quality and budget. And so it's no surprise to me that that's happening, obviously, in the medical device world as well.
Yes, definitely. Memphis is a huge region as well as the Midwest. So one of the manufacturing sites for the same company that has the facility in Memphis is up in the Dayton, Ohio area. And then other Midwest regions, even like Missouri or Oklahoma, those can have very heavy technical labor forces like machinery or field service personnel that need a skilled trade. There are many challenges, not just sourcing the adequate labor, but providing training resources as well.
So, Melissa, are you seeing, I just want to ask about this culture shift, because in my supply chain world and then the manufacturer world, I want to see if it's synonymous, but you have these historical knowledge of individuals that are been in the industry 30 years, 40 years. Is there good succession plans to backfill that into institutional knowledge and the growing process in the manufacturing world? Are you seeing that that changing as well? Is that moving in that direction?
I would say at times, one of the key initiatives I've worked on previously when I was in industry specifically was on progression planning and cross training. It is a huge gap we actually still see today with many of the mid-market companies. There's so much institutional knowledge. Not all of it is necessarily documented, right, in a manner that you can read the work instruction or the standard operating procedure and you can know exactly how to perform the process. There's a lot of nuance in there. And to your point, as you have an aging population and potentially a generational gap through the workforce in those trades, you're missing something. And not only is that cross training vital for the succession of the company and business continuity, but it's also very important to the employee and the personnel.
I want to talk about the training piece that you kind of alluded to a minute ago too. Is like, you have an engineering background, so you obviously went to school for that. But I'm wondering, does everybody who works for a manufacturer on the line, is that training formal like getting an engineering degree, or is some of that training also kind of nuanced or specific to the manufacturer and the product that they're making as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it's a combination of education and on-the-job training. There are oftentimes that we will partner or companies will partner with local trade schools that have a 2-year certification program for machining, for example. However, that's not to say that someone who started as a material handler within that facility can progress through other positions like assembly, inspection, and then become a machinist due to their level of experience and their competence that they've been able to show throughout their role. So I would say that the career path is yours to make it, but as employers and as advisors for operating companies, we have to help outline what that path looks like for success.
So, Melissa, I can imagine it's really important to try to foster these relationships with the local trade schools, because in those, markets where there are labor shortages, to work with them right out of the gate and sort of connect them, to the company as soon as possible is going to help them compete, I guess, for the available labor in the market. Do you find that that's true? And do you find that manufacturers are, generally speaking, really good at leveraging that? Or do you think like more work can be done with the trade schools to help, continue to fill that pipeline of workers?
I think there's opportunity there that companies can use and strategies that they can use to be successful. I don't know that every company does this successfully because it does require a good bit of flexibility in your staffing profile or your strategy. So, for example, if you are going to a trade school, many of your available hours may not be during a normal first shift. So if you're a site that runs 3 shifts or has a skeleton crew on the weekends, then this works out for you, right? That person can attend trade school during first shift, potentially work a 3rd shift schedule or a weekend. However, if you are primarily a 1-shift operation, that flexible staffing and the opportunity for someone to get that on the job experience and also to start with that initial attraction of the employee really does come at your ability to lead and craft a program around your employment and retention.
Melissa, these manufacturers, to entice these individuals to be a part of this program, I even want to take it a step further. How far back are we going? Are we recruiting these kids in high school? Are we hitting them as seniors? Are we hitting them at their senior research projects? How far back are we going? And then obviously getting the 2-year trade schools to make this flow. But how far back are we going right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. Typically, if you're looking at a trade school, you are partnering directly with the school itself. So even as someone enters a trade, you can start talking to them about what that on-the-job support looks like. And potentially, if they're going to a trade that does require 2 or 4-year certification, you might start them in at an entry-level role like that assembler or that material handler, right? Something that does not yet have the required skill set that they haven't gotten with their degree or their certification yet. However, to your point, there is much that can and should be done, I think, right out of high school. Many roles in manufacturing, operations, distribution only require a GED. So that's really where we should be attracting these folks right out of the gate, especially in markets that are high industry or trade areas. It's not common for folks to attend a 4-year degree necessarily to be able to have a career in manufacturing. And I think that we need to focus more there and provide the necessary skills and training to grow their career within the company.
Absolutely. So let's say the company gets them in. What's the retention focused strategies to keep these individuals? I mean, it's hard enough to get them there, and now you're part of the program. You're part of our company. Retention strategies, how much is that a scope of the direction that's the importance to say, we'll send you to school. Say you have the GED and you come in. You know what? We're going to throw this in. Are you seeing this as an opportunity? Because I don't want to lose people. You work so hard to get them in, train them, get them where they need to be, and then you want to elevate them and keep them within you and hopefully keep them happy and build that retention strategy. If you could share maybe even some practices or best projects you've worked on that our listeners could hear too. I'd love to hear that, Melissa.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say the first one is that progression planning. So once you have an employee in the door, they really want to know how they're going to progress and build their career. Folks don't always just want to punch a clock. They want to feel value and they want to feel connected to what they do. So how do they build a career with your company while they're able to support their lifestyle and their families alongside of that? I think it's very important to make sure you've got clear roles and responsibilities outlined between those, so that when you come in as an entry level employee, you're not seen as doing the same thing that a senior level is doing, because that's only going to cause some discontent and frustration, right? As it would for anyone. I think the second part to your point is tuition assistance or reimbursement, as that education opportunity helps support what you do today and where you want to grow in your career. I think that is an investment that pays off tenfold for a company to really make sure that they're retaining that talent long term, that has the initiative, that has the commitment, and that has the good standing with the company.
I just think about how many kids come out of college these days with just an exorbitant amount of debt. And, this is a scenario where, you can get, a degree and maybe an associate's initially, but you can get a degree with virtually no cost out of pocket and enter into a profession that is highly rewarding and highly paid. And so I want to tie this to the medical device piece, because any manufacturer of any product could implement a similar strategy. But I feel like if you're connecting to this, and this is Gary's favorite word, we tease him behind the scenes all the time, but if you can get them connected to the mission of healthcare and also add this element of like true importance and value to their community, to the society, and to the well-being of others, that might provide an advantage for manufacturers in a very similar way to, folks that are trying to recruit talent into, the hospital or healthcare organization. But I feel like you've got that degree of separation when you're trying to accomplish that. So does that work? Does trying to inject this sort of meaningful aspect to what they're doing, if they were to work for a manufacturer, come into play?
I'd say there's more to it. You really have to build the culture, not just from a corporate standpoint, but at the local site itself. So to your point, when you walk into a distribution operations facility, you want to feel like you're making a difference, even if you're going to an area that's pick, pack, ship, right? Everything's boxed. You don't see the product being used on a patient. You want to walk in and feel that what you're doing matters and that can impact a patient's life. One of the sites I worked at down in Memphis was just that. When we walked in, it was kind of dark, kind of dingy. You didn't really want to be there as you walked into the lobby. And we planned and started to change over the culture a bit by first renovating and putting a small showroom in the lobby. How are our implants actually shown in a clear anatomical model, right? So you're not just picking a screw off the shelf or shipping an instrument out the door for surgery the next day, but you know how these products are used and it's being shown on a spinal model. So I think it's a full circle cultural experience that you really have to work to create as you bridge the talents, the attraction, the progression, and how do they feel when they work there every day?
Can you build out that project a little bit? Like you just alluded to something that you did in Memphis and how you started to create that culture and change the environment to connect the workers to it. But I'm sure there was a lot more to it than improving the lighting and putting the anatomical models up, right? And so can you build that story out a little bit more for us?
Absolutely. So I'd say it started with how I felt when I walked into the site. We were experiencing really tough times where we were missing shipments. And I knew why that mattered, because we were canceling surgeries or had to reach out and report back on what was missed and why. When you have a surgery scheduled 2 days out and you can't ship that item next day, it's a really tough experience for all those involved, right? Spinal surgery or orthopedic surgery is not something that you just plan next day. It takes months, sometimes years, to be planned in advance. So when we were faced with that challenge, it was, okay, what is really happening here? We had a ton of operational and process improvements to make down at that site too, but there was a huge cultural component. We had really high turnover. And when you walked into the facility, it didn't make you feel like you wanted to be there, right? There was really old marketing material on the walls, not even relevant anymore. It didn't feel like you were walking into this century. Everything was very outdated. So again, what is that feeling that you exude when you walk into a building? Are you proud to be where you're at? You might be proud on one side, but you don't feel that every day. So it was a multi-year strategy of how do we start investing in our site and our people to have that connected outcome and really change patients' lives.
So Melissa, how did you encompass the whole group from the senior leadership down to the boots on the ground that are assembling the pieces and the parts of the assembly line? How did you connect the dots?
Yeah, it's a great question. Really started with a tiered approach. So to your point, we had focus groups with all levels of the organization and skip level meetings. So not only were we meeting as a senior leadership team, I was connecting with counterparts at other facilities as well as my leadership team. And then looking at the mid-level managers, supervisors, and the hourly employees that worked at the site. What did they like? What was missing? For folks that maybe have left previously and come back, why did they come back? Or folks that have left previously and not come back, what could we do that has changed in the last few years to build back up that culture? And we started to layer that into the opportunity that actually provides on your output and your delivery. So it's not just fixing the process necessarily sometimes, but on those long days where you have to run overtime, you will get a ton of hands raised if people actually want to be there and they know that getting that set out, getting that implant shipped matters to someone versus they're just going to work their 8 hours and clock out at the end of the day.
I loved your analogy earlier talking about a card swiper. You're coming in, you don't want to be transactional. People want to be a qualitative piece of the puzzle. I think it's so important that you brought that up. And then I want to ask you one more question on this. How are you measuring the outcomes of that? It's like signing an agreement. You're only as good as the implementation, right? You worked on your skip and your focus and you got everybody moving in the right direction. How are you measuring that from a qualitative? Are you seeing the quantitative output increase? How are you measuring it?
Yeah, great question. I'd say from the quantitative point, you can always look at turnover. If your turnover is decreasing, that's a huge indication that you're doing something right within your culture, whether that be the progression planning or looking at your compensation and benefits on an annual basis and what opportunity you're providing for the site. I would say the second qualitative piece is related to job progression. Do you have folks that are cross training or with progression plans? And are those employee led, right? So you really want an employee to be driven and own the success of their career. However, how do you support that? And how do you guide and mentor and teach along that path? So that's more of the qualitative piece, is really investing in your employees to build that culture. And you can see that through the cross-training initiatives, having a matrix. You have one person that maybe is cross-trained in 3 out of 5 areas. That's fantastic. They're asking you when they're going to be trained in all 5, right? So I think those are the 2 big areas that folks can focus on.
Melissa, I'm thinking maybe we just emphasize why it's so important to connect these teams, to different stories. Like, I know, like, a lot of times when I'm doing presentations, anybody who's done a really great job with presentations knows that they have to tell a story as they're going through, data or whatever it is. And that's a big part of culture. Like, if we really think about what is folklore, right, that creates culture in communities, it is stories that are passed down. Why is using storytelling so important to help take what you're talking about? Like, great, we've got a good pathway, we've got information up for the workers so that they can kind of see like why it's important, but we still have to contextualize this in some way, right? So how important is storytelling, and how can companies tell these stories to consistently sort of reinforce this culture and this messaging?
Yeah. And you mentioned it earlier. I'm going to focus on that word mission. So when you work in med device, you are changing a patient's life, whether it's on the imaging or whether it's an implant, instrument, process, and it's connecting folks to that mission. So not only are you building a culture in which they know what they do and how it impacts others, but you're building that mission and that brand around the messaging. So when someone goes into work every day, if they're building or inspecting a component, it can feel really routine, right? But what actually connects them to that mission and gives them that feeling of value to what they do every day, and it boosts their morale, boosts their pride. Much of that messaging comes from the impact, and some strategies that we've employed to do that are really patient testimonials in a specific industry. Is during all employee meetings, we will share testimonials, we will talk about it, we will have folks potentially raise their hands or stand up if they've had a certain surgery before. And we've also used and related to best practices at other sites. Other sites had brought in local surgeons to actually speak at those all employee meetings. And that connection is huge to hear how a surgeon is actually using your products every day. Something that you're out there on the floor, picking, packing, shipping. They're explaining how much they love this certain type of product or this new method that's being discussed today. And it's connecting that mission with what you do every day to give it that value.
I could really see how you can reach the surgeons to pull them in to tell that story. You know, obviously, like the reps that are supporting the cases with that manufacturer's product are building a relationship with the surgeon. But you also mentioned bringing in, you know, sort of patient stories and testimonials. And there's like a little extra degree of separation with that. And also, I'm assuming some confidentiality. I would love to hear about how you get from the surgeon to then a patient and getting those stories coming back. And like, do you have to partner as a manufacturer with health systems to be able to make that connection and bring that information, you know, even further in to say, hey, the surgeon can tell you how this is happening, but let's also hear from the patient. Like, this is what their life was like before that implant. This is what it is like today. How do you bridge that gap?
Oftentimes, the surgeon will bring some redacted material, which is a great resource for us. So you take maybe the name out of it, but you see the before and the after and just the transformation in, for example, a scoliosis patient that is an adolescent. And you can really see the curvature of their spine start to straighten over the years to come. And I'd say that's really impactful. The second opportunity is that oftentimes we have patients ourselves that work for the company. So when we have folks that work for the company, they're really empowered to give their story and relate to why this mission is so important to them. And that emotion and that value that's being discussed and presented there is tremendous. It makes you look at the person sitting next to you on the assembly line a little differently. The other part of it is often having potentially friends, family members, and that network you can reach out to, as well as utilizing corporate materials. The company I worked for previously had really great marketing materials where they went out and had patients talk about a new implant or a life-saving procedure that we then shared and discussed as a team internally.
It's funny that you mentioned the spine surgery and scoliosis. The first surgery I ever watched was on a 13-year-old who had kyphoidosis and scoliosis. I was a senior in nursing school. It was like an 8-hour procedure. It's pretty substantial. Like, this is, you know, I think that's also something that maybe people who are not in on the case don't really understand. Like, I don't think the surgeons even left the room for 8 hours. They don't eat, they don't drink. Like, it is a pretty involved and pretty grueling process. And they were sort of like, hey, nursing student, go stand in the corner and don't say anything, you know? And so I stood on my feet for 8 hours and I didn't even have any responsibility. And I got to be honest with you, it was pretty grueling as a, 22-year-old at that time. And so I think, even just like understanding what those procedures are like is sometimes, often foreign. It obviously is to the patients. They have no idea and they're under anesthesia the entire time. So they just, kind of have the before and after effect experience. Whereas, I think definitely telling the story of how involved the procedures are, how critical they are, that they're done correctly, and making sure, to your point, like, do you have the right screw? You can't just ship any screw. You've got to ship the right screw. And so it's really interesting to just hear how you're pulling that in, I think, for manufacturers and their culture internally. And I think the pressure in healthcare has never been greater than it is today. And the last thing we want to, hear is that the manufacturers don't have the staff to deliver on an increasing demand for these procedures. Do you run into that too? Like, in terms of the culture, like really trying to, when they are short staffed, having to really redline some of their employees to meet the demand?
I'd say there's a good bit of getting creative. You need to understand what your priorities are, maybe not even for that week, but for that day. And we've definitely run into those challenges. So it's making sure that, to your point, you've got to have the right screw. So if you go on back order, right, you're totally stocked out, you only have field-based inventory at hospitals. Is there a hospital or a clinic nearby that can courier over the necessary implants for that surgery? And you've got a great team, customer service and logistics that supports that. Otherwise, you're prioritizing and fast tracking the manufacturing, the shipment, and the distribution of that specific size or that specific item. We definitely run into those same challenges as any other manufacturer. But again, it's really making sure that you connect to that mission and you understand the value, because you are going to fast track that. You are going to get that item out the door for that surgery. And you're going to have so much pride in your ability to succeed and do that for a patient at the end of the line.
Yeah, I can imagine when you are asking your teams to go the extra mile, having that positive culture is going to be critical to pulling it off.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've run very long days and been in tough situations in the past, working 6 days a week, 12-hour days. And when you outline that plan on rebuilding a culture, rebuilding teams, implementing progression, and connecting it with the patient mission at the end of the day, folks buy into that. And as long as you say what you said you were going to do, or you do what you said you were going to do, it all works out in the end, and you end up with a site that is really successful, really proud, and very mission driven.
All right, Melissa, this was fantastic. I mean, I don't think we've had a lot of conversations around this. I mean, definitely within the hospital environment, but not with the partners that are there to support what's happening with these procedures in healthcare. And I can't thank you enough for kind of, pulling back the curtain a little bit for our audience today. Is there anything you'd add before we wrap?
I appreciated the conversation too. And honestly, if you want to keep pulling back the curtain, I'm happy to. There are a ton of opportunities, not just on the people side, but the process side too. So making things easier to operate within that facility. How do you do things better, more efficient, easier for the employee? Things shouldn't be difficult. And we really want to make sure that we're successful for everyone in the end.
Oh, I just heard part two. Yeah, I think, and again, I think, seriously, I do think that what excellence in manufacturing looks like would be of interest, to our audience. I mean, even as they do RFPs or try to, understand who they're partnered with, I think that would be of great interest. I don't know about you, Gary, but I think part two is on the way.
And if we're close, I mean, I have like so many things to go down so many lanes, Melissa, but I pulled back because everything that you're talking about was my world. So exactly what you're talking about. I was sitting over that patient. I was following up with neuromodulation. I was doing trauma. I was doing spine. And you're talking about the manufacturing piece. And I was going to ask you about bringing, live real scenarios of those individuals to talk about how they impacted their lives. I mean, that's the goosebumps that give me the serotonin release and make me feel like mission. And you said it, and it's super cool to hear where you're going. And I think this creating that synergy between the product line is almost in the same essence as we talk about supply chain and support services. Like, you're not in that case, but you are part of that solution all day long. And so, Melissa, when you talk about people cross-training or progressive training, number one thing that I used to do is take some of my supply chain people, and if I could put some scrubs on them and stand behind the red line and see what you did to make sure that inventory got where it needed to got to. And my words are horrible at 7 a.m., but I could talk to you all day long about this, Melissa. Good stuff. Good stuff. You hit nail on the head with mission for sure.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I've been in the OR, I've done some ride-alongs, and I think they're really, really impactful, especially for someone that wants to build a career in the space.
That was Melissa Henderson, manager at TriVista, talking about operational excellence from the standpoint of creating a workplace culture within your manufacturer or OEM environments to help connect them to the mission of patient care. And Gary, I know you love the word mission. This episode was for you in so many ways.
Nice. No, Justin, this was great. You brought it up. She was building the storyboard all day long into mission and making it relevant. I mean, on the assembly line, and not just coming in and have a purpose and understand what you're supporting is ultimately the patient on the table. She sold it well. She talked about it well, and it was so important for those individuals that are on the production line to understand that they are part of the process to take care of that patient on the table, and the staff and the surgeon and everybody around it. So very insightful.
Yeah, I love that her background was as an engineer. And then she said, I've done ride-alongs, I've been in cases. I mean, that's a big thing. And we talk about it a lot in terms of, I think, just onboarding and training in healthcare as well, is getting people connected to it. If you're working in sterile processing, you might never see a procedure unless part of your onboarding is to go into a case. If you're in supply chain, you're never going to be involved in a procedure unless somebody invites you to go see a case. And so as much as today's conversation, it was centered around how manufacturers who are even remote, in so many ways, our supply chain folks are now remote from the, patient care environment as well. How do you connect that? And I think there's a lot of transferable themes, regardless of wherever you're impacting patient care and healthcare. I think understanding the why and really having a personal connection to it and that mission, which I know, Gary, is why, you love, tying that to just about every podcast that we do is, let's talk about what we're really trying to accomplish here. And so
yep. That's well said. Thanks, Justin. That's good. Mission focused. Love it.
All right, everybody, on behalf of Hayes, Gary, and myself, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on your iPhone or Android. Simply search for Power Supply in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. We look forward to hearing from you.